This is the last Sunday that we will have the voting table open back there for new board members that will be serving. So again, if you are a member of the church, officially a member of the church, age 15 and above, then stop back there. Also for anybody, there are some report packets, so take one of those. Sean, you come join me up here just for a moment, would you? We've been talking off and on over the last few weeks and months about a mission trip that's happening to Rwanda. Coming up in just a couple of weeks, we're going to be sending a team back to some ministry partnerships that we've had over the last few years in Rwanda. But Sean, you're leaving this week, right? Tuesday. Well, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and who you're taking, all that stuff, would you?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it short, but mending broken fences here. So this is a quick story. Through the death of our daughter and the Team Halley formation, I came friends with a guy named Jeff Mitty, and he's the head women's basketball coach for K-State. And long story short, we've got to know each other quite a bit over the last 10 years. About 2018, he approached me and he said, I would like to take my team somewhere other than a paid vacation to Europe where we go do these European basketball tours. And I was like, why? And he said, well, all they've ever known is basketball from the age, 4 up. And I want to do something in their lives that might make a difference. So long story short, through a lot of conversation, we decided to go back to a place that I'd fallen in love with back in 19, thank you, place in Rwanda. And this was the coach's idea. He goes, it would be nice if we could do something like a project that would kind of bring everybody together. And we came up with the idea of building a basketball court. Go figure, right? So we're in the process of building it right now because we knew we couldn't, pour a full-size basketball court. But this is what you see right up here. And this is 2 weeks ago Saturday. And ultimately... mass chaos is what I call this, but they're mixing the concrete, right, and they're pouring the slab. For those who have been there, that's the new clinic there in the background right there, okay, and the church that we worked on when we were there in 19 is just about 40 feet behind the photographer here. But ultimately, you can see that they're mixing it on the ground. Originally, they told me we're going to get a mixer. But then Simon said, I had people, I had the right time, it was raining, we went with it. So... They've got the court pretty much completed. We're going to build some bleachers, a fence around it, basketball goals. We're also going to do some painting in the clinic in the foreground back there. We got a plumbing project. We hope to overlap with the ministry team going. What date do you guys leave, Barry? 31st. Yeah. But through a lot of negotiation, we couldn't get them to quite overlap. So we're going to leave, and I think literally, 4 or 5 days later, you guys are going to show up. So we're taking some stuff on your behalf. I think you guys are going to take some stuff on our behalf. So I've got about 500 Bibles I'm going to hand off to you. But ultimately, we're really excited, and, I think God, it's funny how he turns tragedy into something I hope is good. So hopefully we'll change some lives along the way. That's our hope.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing that. Help me say thanks. That's cool, man. Thanks. Thank you. Hey, read this with me, would you? Psalm 37, verse 4. Let's read it aloud together. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. We've titled our current series, Mending What's Broken. And of course, what's broken mostly is us, right? Me, you. And though the content of this series is thoroughly, completely biblical, we're borrowing the framework of this series from Dr. Mark and Deborah Lacer's book, 7 Desires. If you have desired to read more deeply about this, then that's the book that we're borrowing the framework from this. in which they say, we believe that God created us with 7 basic universal desires. God put the 7 desires deep inside our souls for good reasons. When we understand our desires and realize they are the same for everyone, we can live in deeper and more meaningful community. So that's one of the goals, is learning how to live in deeper and more meaningful community with one another. Understanding our desires also helps us discover our true need for God. He is the only one who can truly satisfy our desires at the deepest level of our soul. And that's what we're working on. Sometimes when we read this verse, delight yourself in the Lord. He'll give you the desires of your heart. We think about all those kind of surface desires, those things we want in life. And come on, God, deliver. But God's talking about those deep, deep desires of our heart and life that He's built into us. So today we're talking about our deep heart desire to be touched. Anybody want to leave the room yet? This is your time. No, let me share this story with you. I've actually shared this story before, but it's just the perfect story. As I thought about it, I just couldn't come up with a better one that I could recall. It's just the perfect story for this morning's topic. So I had to use it again. Pastor Randy Frazee wrote a book a number of years ago called The Connecting Church, and it's this story. He said, a few years ago, my wife and I finally cracked under the pleas of our children to add a dog to the family. Anybody want to testify? Yes. Finally cracked under the pleas of our children to add a dog to the family. We gave in after 11 years of begging. 2 days before Christmas, we purchased a full-bred beagle puppy we named Lady. And she had lived with us for about a year when we took a family vacation without her. The children were very concerned about the well-being of Lady while we were away and insisted that if we couldn't take her with us, we get her the best possible accommodations. So, through the help of another pet-obsessed friend, we located a place, the Pet Hotel. This was the first I'd ever heard of such a thing. Each pet is assigned an individual room. There's a television playing during the day for the dog to watch. The feedings are at precisely the time we offer them in her normal routine. The pets are actually walked and doted on more at the pet hotel than they are at home. This made the children feel better, made me feel poorer. He says parenthetically, I've never been able to tell my father that I spent hard-earned money for an animal to stay in a pet hotel. For anyone born during the Depression, this would be an incomprehensible decision. I must have been born during the Depression. I didn't know it, but it's an incomprehensible decision for me as well. But our family, he says, returned home on a Friday night, too late to pick up Lady. So the first order of business on Saturday morning was to head to the pet hotel. We gathered all her personal belongings and received a report ensuring us that they'd done everything they promised and paid the bill. When we got into the car, each of us eagerly petted Lady, genuinely happy to have her back. However, as we petted her, large clumps of hair clung to our hands. And while I tried to convince the children that everything was okay, I was actually thoroughly concerned. When we arrived home, I called the vet in a panic. After I explained our dog's symptoms upon picking her up from our 7-day vacation, the doctor told me that Lady was stressed by our absence. And he suggested we spend about 2 hours with her at home, and then her hair would stick once again. I seriously doubted the prescription. But the thought of avoiding a visit to their office after paying the pet hotel bill worked for me. I kid you not, he says. Within 15 minutes of being with us in our home, we couldn't pull a hair from Lady's body. It was quite unbelievable to me. The doctor was right after all. And then he offers this. If a dog starts to fall apart after just 7 days of being robbed of community, how much more is it true for humans who are created in the image of God for community, for connection? We were designed by God physically, emotionally, and spiritually to require community for our health. In the Gift of Touch, Helen Colton says that the hemoglobin in the blood increases significantly when we are touched. He says hemoglobin is the part of the blood that carries vital supplies of oxygen to the heart and the brain. She concludes that if we want to be healthy, we must touch one another. So, yeah, I thought and prayed about all this. Here's what we're going to do. We're just going to spend the rest of the morning just working the room, just hugging and kissing and just... Maybe not. You thought last week was weird. Just wait. We're taking it up. We're taking it up a notch. So, the Bible teaches us, right? Greet each other with a holy kiss. So we're just gonna. No, we're not. We're not going to do that. So, did you know there was a scientific study done at the University of North Carolina? So how credible can it be? But University of North Carolina several years ago that found that people who hug a lot have a lower risk of heart disease. Did you know that? People who hug a lot. So like the chances of my wife ever dying of a heart attack are basically nil, so probably not going to happen. So the Lacers say the human desire to be touched has two forms of expression. One is sexual and the second is non-sexual, right? Sexual and non-sexual. Let me say two things briefly about sexual touch. All right. First, obviously, just hearing the words sexual touch, then our mind pretty quickly goes, to that ultimate expression of sexual touch that we call intercourse. Right. I'm pushing all the uncomfortable buttons this morning for you. And of course, our culture preaches to us constantly. That encounter is where real satisfaction happens in life. The ultimate fulfillment of our desire to be touched happens, under the sheets or in the back seat of a car or wherever it might happen, right? However, did you know that God is really smart? That's one of the things I've come to believe about God, is that God is really smart. It's like he knows us. It's like he knows how we're put together. It's like he knows how we're wired. And he knows that real satisfaction, even in intercourse, happens when the physical union is combined with an emotional and spiritual union. Because that's how we were created. When the physical and the emotional and the spiritual all come together, it's how we were created. We were created as interconnected beings. We love to silo our lives. We love to talk about our spiritual life and our social life and whatever. We love to silo our life, but we're not made like this. We're made like this, right? We were created as interconnected beings. We are not just physical. We are not mere animals. And that physical, emotional, and spiritual union takes place to its fullest extent. The way God designed and desires to its fullest extent in the context of a deeply secure, committed, exclusive, permanent, loving relationship between a man and a woman. It's just the way God created it. Let me say those words again. The physical, emotional, spiritual union takes place to the fullest extent, the way God designed it, the way God desires for us, in the context of a deeply secure, committed, exclusive, permanent, loving relationship between a man and a woman. That's why God ordained the institution of marriage and taught us to save sex for and to express sex within that sacred relationship that we call marriage. He didn't tell us that to keep the good life from us. He told us that to give the good life to us. And that's where sexual touch has the best chance of becoming everything that God intended for it to become. Second thing I want to say about sexual touch is this: the energy that God built into us that expresses itself as sexual energy is actually way bigger than that. It's way bigger than just sexual energy. This same energy is what pushes us in other directions. It pushes us to be productive. It pushes us to be passionate. It drives us to be creative. It drives us to build things and to solve problems and to invent new solutions to life's problems. The Lacers say it's the source of passion and all things creative in us. This sexual energy, or what we understand to be sexual energy, it's the source of passion and all things creative in us. And so we thank God. Really, we thank God for our sexual energy. Sometimes when we're, having trouble containing it or steering it in healthy directions, we might think of it as a curse in our lives instead of a blessing, but it's not. It's the gift that drives way more than simply our sexuality in our lives. So there's sexual touch. We'll leave that. You're saying, okay, let's move on, right? And then there's non-sexual touch. There's non-sexual touch. That's what Randy Frazee was right about when he said, if we want to be healthy, we must touch one another. Now, some of you, there are some people in this room who know way, way, way more about this than I do. But there are some very powerful chemicals in the brain, chemicals like oxytocin, that get released into our body when skin-to-skin contact occurs. And those chemicals give us a sense of well-being. A sense of safety, we might say, which is actually one of the topics we're going to cover during these weeks. But it gives us a sense of well-being that's so very essential if we're going to grow and develop appropriately in life. I'm sure you've heard, we won't go into it this morning, but I'm sure you've heard, we've even talked about it before, some of the just unthinkably tragic, torturous, sadistic experience that have taken place in various places among various peoples throughout the years of intentionally withholding touch from infants, from newborn babies. Intentionally, just as by way of experiment, just intentionally not cuddling and not interacting with, not playing with, not holding new babies And the resulting, go figure, the high infant mortality rate that has come as a result of those ruthless experiments that have been conducted. Guys, appropriate touch matters. It really does. And maybe we just take it for granted, but please don't. Appropriate touch matters. Husbands and wives, would you listen to me, please? And I don't take this for granted because I've heard too many stories through the years. Husbands and wives, please, please appropriately touch each other. It matters. Loving, regular, appropriate touch matters so much in your home. Moms and dads, please appropriately touch your kids. It matters so much. Grace community, please appropriately touch one another. We make fun of, or just have fun with the fact that my wife is such a hugger, and I'm a hugger. I'm not over here with her, but but it always, it always kind of boggles my mind through the years how people just literally stand in line to give my wife a hug. And a lot of times it's because people are just desperate for that sense of touch and appropriate touch. And I just want to commission you as a congregation. Of course, you can't step into people where they don't want to be stepped into, right? But I just commission us to be a congregation that's filled with appropriate touch toward one another. And of course, you get to define what appropriate touch is in your own life, right? But there's something life-giving. There's something humanizing about appropriate touch. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's why Jesus was a toucher. Just for fun, I Googled how many times did Jesus touch someone when he healed them. And according to Google, the number of instances I found in which Jesus was the initiator of the touch. Sometimes it happened the other way around where somebody was trying to touch Jesus. But when the number of instances I found which Jesus initiated the touching was 18 times in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of course, some of those are the same encounter that are repeated by various authors. But even so, it illustrates the point that most often when Jesus healed somebody, his ministry of healing to them included the ministry of appropriate touch. Let's look at just a few of the instances, okay? We'll just look in Matthew's gospel at a few of these instances. The first book in the New Testament, the gospel according to Matthew, chapter 8, verses 2 and 3, a man with leprosy came and knelt down before Jesus and said, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately he was cleansed from his leprosy. I actually spoke about this story a few weeks ago, actually from Mark's telling, the Gospel of Mark's telling. But we talked at length on that day about what a big deal it was that Jesus touched a man with leprosy, right? I mean, he just didn't do that. Because there wasn't a cure, and so there were laws, social laws around not touching people with leprosy, but Jesus did. He touched him. Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 and 15, when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever, and he touched her hand. And the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on them. Matthew chapter 9, verses 23 and following, when Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes because it was a funeral kind of thing, he said, "Go away, the girl's not dead, she's asleep." But they laughed at him. And after the crowd had been put outside, he went in and he took the girl by the hand, and she got up. Matthew chapter 20, verses 30 and following, 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." And the crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet. But they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." And Jesus stopped and he called them. What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. And "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." And Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. So here's a question. Why do you think Jesus so often employed the ministry of touch? Why did he so often employ the ministry of touch? Do you think it was a necessary part of the healing act? Meaning, like, he couldn't heal them unless he touched them. Somehow, healing, somehow the power of God was transferred through the touch. I'm guessing not. Because, there are other instances, right? Like he calmed a storm with only his words. 2 words, in fact. "Be still." And he raised a guy from the dead with words only. 3 words. "Lazarus, come forth." So I'm pretty sure he could have managed, like Simon Peter's mother-in-law's fever without touching her, right? You think? So why do you think Jesus so often added touch to the equation of his healing encounters? Well, I can't prove it. But I'm convinced it was because he knew that touch is one of the deepest God-given desires of the human heart. And he knew full well that there's something life-giving. There's something humanizing about appropriate touch. And I'm convinced that Jesus isn't only concerned about our spiritual well-being, but he's concerned about our all-around well-being. The Hebrew word for it is shalom, right? Peace. But it's more than peace. It's well-being. It's wholeness. Can I ask you a question? How's your journey toward shalom going? How's your journey toward well-being, toward wholeness going? Because I'm convinced God really cares about that. And a follow-up question. Is there some part of your life, maybe a deep, hidden part that you've been too afraid or perhaps too ashamed of to allow Jesus access to it so that he can touch it? What I mean is there some part of your heart? Is there some part of your life? Is there some memory? Is there some habit? Is there some temptation? Is there some epic failure? Is there some struggle? Is there something that someone once did to you, or something that someone is doing to you? Or is there some deep hurt? Or is there something that's causing you to live with just a handicapping level of humiliation and loneliness and sense of despair or hopelessness? Is there something that's caused you to quarantine off some big chunk of your heart and live with this kind of suffocating sense of isolation? Maybe because of pain, and so you live very guarded, you've put up walls, or maybe because of shame, so you live with deep secrets. Let me ask it this way. Is there some area of your life that feels untouchable? Like, Jesus, you wouldn't dare want to touch that. I'm going to share with you something that I've only ever shared publicly one time, I think, and I've shared it in smaller settings. I think I've only shared it one time publicly like this, but because it's embarrassing, sensitive. I was 4 or 5 years old. It's a little guy, pre-kindergarten. And I don't blame my parents for this. I don't blame my mom for this or anything. When I think back on it, I think, what were you thinking? But it was just a different day, right? We lived in a little bitty small town, and just basically kind of trusted people. And I had a friend lived a couple streets over, and invited me to sleep in the tent in the backyard with him, and then this older teenager kid was going to sleep in the tent with us. And, it was just a terrible idea, but especially since my parents didn't really know them, but we did, and very, very inappropriate things happened in my little 4-year-old life at the hands of a teenager. And even though it's not like that event, like, just totally devastated or completely train wrecked my life. I mean, my life did get train wrecked, but it wasn't just because of that. But I obviously carried some sense of shame and emotional pain from the memory of that event, and the reason I say that is because I never, ever told anybody. And that's usually a pretty good indication of shame, is when you feel like you can't tell anybody. I never told my parents what happened. I never told anybody what happened. And even though I was totally the victim, I was an innocent little preschooler, right? But I obviously carried that shame until I finally discovered there's absolutely no brokenness that Jesus is afraid of, or repulsed by, or unwilling to touch. Did you know that? There is absolutely no brokenness in your life or anybody else's that Jesus is afraid of, that he's intimidated by, that he's repulsed by, that he's unwilling to touch. And when I, by God's grace, when I got bold enough to quit hiding and bring that brokenness to Jesus, he reached out his hand and did his healing work in that area of my life. And you know what the coolest thing is about Jesus' touch? When Jesus touches what's dirty and diseased and dying, it doesn't contaminate him. He makes what he touches clean. Friends, every human being has a deep desire, a deep longing to be appropriately touched. It's life-giving, and it's humanizing. So, loved ones, we need to appropriately touch and allow ourselves to be appropriately touched. But that being so, the touch we long for most desperately, whether we recognize it or not, way in the deep, deep center of our hearts is the life-giving touch of Jesus. So I'm just wondering if you need to seek the touch of Jesus today. Maybe not what you had in mind for Mother's Day. I don't know. But I'm just wondering if you just need to seek the healing touch of Jesus in your life today. Linda, would you come? The band can come. I forgot to wear my watch today. What time is it? How much time do we have? When I don't wear my watch, I can just talk as long as I want to. So, guys, if you've never said yes to Jesus' invitation to know him as your forgiver, to know him as the deep, intimate friend that he wants to be in your life, to know him as your healer, that kind of deep healing that begins from the inside out. And if you've never said yes to Jesus' invitation, this Mother's Day would be a really, really good time to do that. Just to say yes, Jesus. Even if maybe what's been holding you back is like, truth be known, Jesus, you don't really want people like me. You don't want broken people like me. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And so maybe this morning the move you need to make is that move, to just say yes, Jesus. I want to put my faith and trust in you. I want to invite you to be the forgiver of my sins, the leader of my life. Or maybe this morning, maybe you've just become aware again of something you've been trying to push down, trying to forget, maybe it's something really dark and painful, maybe less dark and painful than that, but truth is you just need to invite Jesus to come and touch that place in your life and put you on a journey toward healing and wholeness.